Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another wild one for you today. This one starts with a birthday request so outrageous you'll think I'm making it up. But trust me, it gets so much worse before it gets better. Buckle up, because as we build in our Minecraft world, I'll walk you through this story. What happens next is a masterclass in knowing your worth and walking away with your head held high. Before we dive in, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone showing love in the comments and supporting the channel. You're amazing, and it truly means more than you know. And before everything went off the rails, things actually seemed great. Our narrator really thought he had something solid and stable. But as you're about to see, even the best looking relationships can fall apart once the truth comes out. I thought Maya and I were solid. Like actually solid. Not the kind of solid where you're just coasting and hoping things work out. We'd been together for 3 years. We talked about moving in together, about what our life would look like in 5 years, 10 years. We had inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. We knew each other's coffee orders by heart. I genuinely believed we were building something real. Then she hit me with it. We were sitting on her couch, some random Netflix show playing in the background that neither of us were really watching. She got quiet in that way that meant something heavy was coming, and I braced myself thinking maybe she wanted to talk about wedding timelines or meeting with a realtor. Instead, she said she'd been thinking a lot about her 30th birthday coming up, and she had a request. A big one. She wanted a hall pass. Specifically, she wanted to sleep with her ex Ryan one last time for closure. I just stared at her. I genuinely thought I'd misheard. But she kept talking, and with every word it became painfully clear that no, I'd heard her correctly. She framed the whole thing like it was this mature, evolved idea, like we were so secure in our relationship that we could handle something like this. She said it wasn't about feelings, it was just nostalgia, a way to close that chapter of her life before fully committing to our future together. She actually used the phrase closure ceremony at one point, like that made it better. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. This was the person I'd been planning a life with, and she was sitting there calmly explaining why she needed to sleep with someone else. Not a stranger, not some random fling. Her ex, the guy she'd dated for 2 years before me, the guy whose name still came up occasionally in stories about her past. I asked her if she was serious. She said yes, completely. She'd thought it through. She even had a whole explanation ready about how honesty was the foundation of our relationship, and she didn't want to hide this desire from me. Like I should be grateful for her transparency. Here's where it gets absurd. I told her flat out, if you go through with this, we're done. There's no coming back from it. This isn't some boundary we can negotiate. You sleep with him, you're choosing him over us, and I'm gone. She got defensive immediately, called me controlling, said I was being insecure and immature, that if I really loved her, I'd understand this wasn't about replacing me. It was about her needing to process her past. She actually said that a truly confident partner would support her through this, like I was the one with the problem for not wanting my girlfriend to sleep with her ex as a birthday present to herself. I didn't yell. I didn't freak out. I just repeated myself. You do this, we're over. Your choice. She stared at me for a long time, and I could see her doing the mental calculation. Part of me hoped she'd realize how insane this was and back down, maybe laugh it off like it was some kind of test. But instead, she stood up, grabbed her keys, and said she'd be back later, that she needed space to think about whether she wanted to be with someone who would give her ultimatums. I sat there on that couch for probably 10 minutes after she left, just staring at the door. Then I called my best friend, told him what happened, and asked if I could crash at his place for a few days. He said yes immediately, no questions asked. I started packing. I didn't take everything, just enough to get by. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, some books. I moved methodically, like I was on autopilot. Every item I put in my bag felt like another piece of the life we built together crumbling away. I found a framed photo of us from a trip we'd taken to the coast last summer. We looked so happy. I left it face down on the dresser. Before I walked out, I blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform. I wasn't interested in the explanations or the justifications or the inevitable crying voicemails. I'd given her a clear choice, and whatever she decided, I was done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if there was something I'd missed, some sign that this was coming. My friend tried to distract me with video games and pizza, but I was somewhere else entirely. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. It buzzed again and again. I turned it off. The next morning, she showed up at my friend's apartment. I have no idea how she knew I was there. Maybe she'd called around to mutual friends. She looked wrecked, eyes red and puffy, mascara smudged, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She started talking before I even fully opened the door. She'd made a mistake, a huge mistake. She went to Ryan's place, but the second she got there, she realized how wrong it all was. She didn't go through with it. She left. She drove around for hours just thinking, and she understood now that I was right, that what she'd asked for was insane and selfish and completely unfair. She chose me. She wanted us. Could we please just talk? I looked at her standing there, desperate and broken, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even sadness anymore. Just this overwhelming sense of clarity. I told her I'd already made my choice too. The second she walked out that door to even consider sleeping with someone else, she'd shown me exactly where I ranked in her priorities. It didn't matter that she didn't go through with it. She was willing to. She was ready to throw away 3 years for one night with an ex. That told me everything I needed to know. She started crying harder, reaching for me, saying she'd do anything to fix this. Therapy, couples counseling, whatever I needed. But I just shook my head. Some things you can't come back from. This was one of them. I closed the door. I heard her standing there for a few minutes, sobbing, before she finally left. My friend asked if I was okay. I said I would be, and honestly, I was. It took time, sure. There were nights where I questioned if I'd been too harsh, if I should have at least heard her out. But every time I thought about taking her back, I remembered that moment on the couch when she told me she wanted to sleep with her ex. Like it was a totally reasonable request. I remembered her calling me controlling for having boundaries. I remembered her walking out that door. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. I chose myself, my self-respect, my future, and I never looked back. But not everyone walks away so cleanly. Sometimes the ex isn't just a one-time mistake. They're a constant shadow hanging over everything you do. I thought Jen and I were building something real. We'd been together for about 8 months and things felt good, stable, or at least they should have felt stable. But there was this shadow hanging over everything we did, and his name was Marcus. Marcus was her ex, and according to Jen, he was apparently perfect. It started small. We'd be out to dinner and she'd mention how Marcus always knew exactly what wine to order. Or we'd be watching a movie and she'd say Marcus had introduced her to that director. Little comments here and there that I tried to brush off because, hey, everyone has a past, right? You can't expect someone to just erase their history. But then it got worse. Marcus never forgot anniversaries. Marcus always planned the most thoughtful date nights. Marcus remembered her coffee order without being told. Marcus bought her flowers just because. Marcus was more romantic. Marcus was more attentive. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. Every single day, there was something, and every single day, it chipped away at me a little more. I started trying harder. I set reminders for every little occasion I could think of. I planned elaborate dates. I bought flowers every week. I memorized her coffee order, her favorite takeout, the way she liked her toast in the morning. I studied her like I was preparing for an exam, trying to figure out what would finally be enough. Nothing worked. No matter what I did, Marcus had apparently done it better. I could plan a weekend getaway, and she'd mention how Marcus once surprised her with a trip to the coast. I could cook her favorite meal, and she'd say Marcus made it differently, with this one special ingredient that made all the difference. It was like competing with a ghost, except this ghost was somehow winning. I started wondering why she was even with me. If Marcus was so incredible, why wasn't she still with him? I asked her once, trying to keep my voice casual, and she just said it hadn't worked out, that they'd wanted different things, but she never elaborated, and I didn't push because, honestly, I was afraid of the answer. The thing is, I genuinely cared about her. When she wasn't comparing me to her ex, we had good moments. She was smart and funny and we could talk for hours about nothing, but those comparisons were constant, and they were killing me. I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming less of a person and more of a Marcus-shaped void that would never quite measure up. I tried talking to her about it. I sat her down one night and told her as gently as I could that the constant comparisons were hurting me, that I felt like I was always falling short of some impossible standard. She got defensive immediately, said I was being insecure, that she was just sharing parts of her life with me, and if I couldn't handle that she had a past, maybe that was my problem. So I tried harder. Again, because what else could I do? Then came the party. It was Jen's friend group, people I'd met a few times but didn't know well. I was standing in the kitchen, nursing a beer and trying to look like I belonged, when her best friend Rachel appeared next to me. She had this look on her face, serious and a little nervous, like she was working up the courage to say something. She asked if we could talk outside. My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever starts with someone asking if you can talk outside at a party. I followed her onto the back deck, where the music was muffled and the night air was cold enough to make me shiver. Rachel didn't waste time. She asked me how things were going with Jen. I gave some non-committal answer, not wanting to air our problems to her best friend. But Rachel saw right through it. She said she'd noticed the Marcus comments, that she'd seen the look on my face every time Jen brought him up. Then she told me something that made my entire understanding of the situation flip upside down. Marcus hadn't been romantic. He'd been controlling. The flowers weren't sweet gestures. They were apologies after he'd torn her down. The thoughtful dates were his way of keeping her isolated from her friends. The wine he always ordered? He'd trained her to like what he liked, criticized her choices until she stopped making them. Every single thing Jen held up as an example of his perfection was actually a manipulation tactic. Rachel said Marcus had been emotionally abusive, that he'd gaslight Jen constantly, making her question her own perception of reality. He'd tell her she was too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. Then he'd love bomb her with grand gestures that made her feel like she was the problem for ever doubting him. He'd isolated her from friends, controlled what she wore, monitored her phone, and he'd done it all while making her believe this was what love looked like. The relationship had destroyed her, Rachel said. It took Jen months to even realize what had happened to her. And even now, 2 years later, she'd romanticized the abuse because it was the only framework she had for what a relationship should be. I stood there on that deck, freezing and reeling, trying to process what I was hearing. All those comparisons, all those impossible standards, they weren't about me failing. They were about Jen being so traumatized that she'd mistaken control for care, manipulation for romance. Rachel told me she was sharing this because she could see I genuinely cared about Jen, that most guys would have walked away by now, but I was still trying. She said Jen needed help, real help, but she was too deep in denial to see it, and maybe coming from me, she might actually listen. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every comparison, every comment, seeing them through this new lens. The romantic gestures weren't standards I was failing to meet. They were red flags Jen had been waving at me without realizing it. The next day, I asked Jen if we could talk. Really talk. I told her what Rachel had told me. I was gentle, careful, watching her face for any sign that I should stop. But I needed her to hear it. I needed her to understand that Marcus wasn't the standard. He was the problem. She denied it at first, got angry, said Rachel had no right to talk about her relationship, that I was twisting things. But I didn't back down. I asked her specific questions about the flowers, about the dates, about the way Marcus made decisions for both of them. And then she broke. She just crumbled right there on the couch, and everything came pouring out. Years of manipulation and control and gaslighting that she'd convinced herself was love. She talked about how Marcus made her feel small and then built her back up just enough to keep her dependent. How he'd convinced her that his jealousy was passion, his control was protection, his cruelty was just him being honest when no one else would be. She'd left him because her friends had staged an intervention. But even after leaving, she couldn't let go of the narrative he'd built. That he was perfect and she was lucky to have him, and if the relationship failed, it was because she wasn't enough. This hits different when you realize someone's trying to heal from something they don't even recognize as a wound. We started therapy. Together at first, then she went on her own too. It was slow, painful work. There were setbacks, days where she'd slip back into old patterns, comparing me to Marcus or defending behaviors that were objectively toxic. But gradually, something shifted. She started seeing Marcus for who he really was, started recognizing the manipulation tactics, the control disguised as care. And she started seeing me too, actually seeing me, Instead of seeing a Marcus-shaped hole I was failing to fill, the comparisons stopped. Not all at once, but they faded, replaced by conversations about what we both wanted, what felt right for us, without some ghost dictating the terms. It wasn't about me versus Marcus anymore. It was about helping Jen understand that love shouldn't make you smaller, that romance isn't grand gestures designed to keep you off balance, that real care is consistent, respectful, and doesn't come with strings attached. We're still together, still working on it. Some days are harder than others, and I won't pretend it's been easy, but she's healing, really healing, and watching that happen has been worth every frustrating comparison I endured. Sometimes the person you're competing with isn't real. They're a fiction built by someone who knew exactly how to twist love into something toxic. And breaking free from that fiction, for both of us, meant learning what love actually looks like. Derek and I had always been friendly, not best friends or anything, but we grabbed coffee sometimes, talked shop, complained about the same outdated software the company refused to upgrade. We were both good at what we did, both gunning for the senior analyst position that had opened up after our last manager retired. It was competitive, sure, but I thought it was the healthy kind, the kind where you push each other to be better. I actually respected the guy. That was my first mistake. I'd been with the company for 4 years, Derek for about 3. We both had strong track records, solid performance reviews, good relationships with clients. Honestly, I thought it could go either way. I was putting in extra hours, tightening up my reports, making sure every presentation was flawless. I figured the best person would win, and I was fine with that. I really was. I just wanted it to be fair. Then, one Tuesday morning, my boss called me into her office. The door closed behind me, and I immediately knew something was wrong. Her face was tight, almost apologetic, but there was something else there too. Disappointment, maybe. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me there had been a serious breach. Client data had been leaked. Confidential information had been sent to an outside email address. And according to the IT logs, it had come from my account. I just stared at her. For a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. Leaked data? My account? I told her that was impossible. I would never do that. I didn't even know what she was talking about. She slid a printed email chain across the desk. There it was. My name. My email address. Timestamps from late nights when I'd supposedly been working from home. Attachments with client files I recognized. It looked damning. It looked real. She said they were launching a formal investigation, but in the meantime I was being suspended. Effective immediately. I needed to hand over my laptop, my access card, and leave the building. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I tried to explain, tried to tell her I had no idea how this happened, but she just kept saying it was protocol. Nothing personal, just procedure. I walked out of that office in a daze, packed up my desk while everyone watched, and left. The panic didn't hit until I got home. This wasn't just a suspension. This was my career. If they thought I'd leaked client data, I was done. Not just at this company, but anywhere in the industry. Who hires someone with that kind of accusation hanging over them? I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what had happened. And then it clicked. Derek. We were the only two up for that promotion. If I was out of the picture, the job was his. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The timing was too convenient. The emails had been sent during hours I wasn't even online. Someone had accessed my account. Someone who knew enough about my work patterns to make it look believable. I needed proof. I needed someone who could dig deeper than I could. I hired a digital forensics specialist. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I emptied my savings account and handed over every login, every device, every piece of access I had. I told him everything. He got to work immediately, and I waited. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I barely left my apartment. I kept checking my phone, hoping for an update, dreading what he might find. When he finally called, I almost didn't want to answer. But I did. And what he told me changed everything. The emails hadn't come from my devices. They'd come from an external IP address, a home internet connection registered to someone else. He'd traced it back, cross-referenced the timestamps, checked the metadata. It was all there. And the IP, it belonged to Derek. This guy had spoofed my credentials. He'd logged into a dummy account that looked like mine, sent those emails from his own house, and framed me for corporate espionage. The forensics guy walked me through every piece of evidence: the IP logs, the timestamps showing I'd been offline when the emails were sent, the metadata showing the files had been accessed from a location I'd never been. It was airtight. I printed everything. I made copies. I put together a file so detailed it could have been used in court. And then I went straight to HR and legal. The meeting was tense. I sat across from HR, the legal team, and my boss. I didn't say much at first. I just slid the folder across the table and told them to read it. I watched their faces change as they flipped through the pages. The confusion, the realization, the anger. My boss looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. The legal rep actually swore under his breath. They asked if I was certain. I told them my forensics guy would testify to every word of it. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said I wanted Derek gone and I wanted my job back. Everything else I'd leave up to them. It took less than 2 hours. Derek was called into the office. I wasn't there for it, but I heard about it later. He tried to deny it at first, said it was a misunderstanding, that someone must have hacked him too, but they had everything. The IP logs, the timestamps, his internet provider's records. He had no way out. They fired him on the spot, walked him out of the building the same way they'd walked me out. The legal team told him if he didn't go quietly, they'd pursue criminal charges for fraud, data theft, and corporate sabotage. He went quietly. The company called me the next day, apologized profusely, offered to reinstate me immediately, but I wasn't interested in just getting my job back. I told them what this had cost me: the forensics expert, the sleepless nights, the damage to my reputation. They promoted me to senior analyst on the spot, with a raise, and a formal written apology that went into my file. You almost have to admire the audacity. This guy didn't just try to edge me out in a competitive process. He tried to destroy my entire career. He was willing to send me down in flames just to get ahead, and he thought he'd get away with it. I went back to work the following Monday. Derek's desk had already been cleared out. People whispered, some apologized for doubting me, others just avoided eye contact. I didn't care. I had my job, I had my promotion, and I had proof that I'd been right all along. Months went by. I settled into the new role. I stopped thinking about Derek, stopped checking over my shoulder, and then one day I got a LinkedIn message. It was him. The message was long, rambling. He said he'd been desperate, that he had debt, family pressure, a mortgage he couldn't afford. He said he'd made a terrible mistake and he was sorry. He asked if we could talk. Maybe even if I could put in a good word for him somewhere. I read it twice and then I deleted it. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him anything. Not my forgiveness, not my time, not a single word. He made his choice. He tried to ruin me, and now he had to live with the consequences. Some people think revenge is loud, that it's about confrontation, about making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. But sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. Derek did that all on his own. I just made sure the right people saw it. Workplace betrayals sting, but family betrayals, those cut to the bone, especially when they use your deepest secrets as weapons. My sister Liz was the golden child, always had been. She married a pastor, had 2 beautiful kids, volunteered at every church function, baked cookies for school events, and somehow always looked put together even at 7 in the morning. From the outside, her life looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Meanwhile, I was the messy one, the one who'd struggled with anxiety, made mistakes, had a few relationships that didn't work out. Normal human stuff, but in comparison to Liz's highlight reel, I looked like a disaster. The thing is, I trusted her. She was my big sister. When I was going through a particularly rough patch a couple years back, dealing with panic attacks and some poor decisions I'd made in my early 20s, she was the one I called. She listened. She gave advice. She told me everyone messes up and that our parents would understand if I ever wanted to talk to them about it. I never did, but it felt good knowing she had my back. Turns out she was just collecting ammunition. It started at a family dinner, one of those big Sunday gatherings at our parents' house where everyone's supposed to smile and pretend everything's perfect. Liz and I got into an argument about something stupid. I don't even remember what sparked it. Maybe a comment about parenting styles or career choices. Something minor that shouldn't have mattered. But Liz escalated it. fast. She started bringing up things I'd told her in confidence, in front of everyone. She told our parents I'd been hiding my anxiety issues from them, that I'd made mistakes I was too ashamed to admit. She framed it like she was concerned, like she was trying to help, but her tone was pure venom. She said I was unstable, that I was hiding things, that they needed to know the truth about who I really was. I just sat there, completely blindsided. My parents looked at me with this mixture of confusion and disappointment. They believed her. Of course they did. Liz was the responsible one, the trustworthy one. Why would she lie? I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that those were private conversations, things I'd shared with her in confidence. But the damage was done. My dad said we'd talk about it later. My mom looked worried. Liz sat back with this satisfied little smile, like she'd just won something. I left early, drove home in a daze. I couldn't believe my own sister had just weaponized my vulnerabilities against me in front of our entire family. The person I trusted most had turned my darkest moments into a public spectacle. And here's where it gets absurd. I spent the next few days feeling completely betrayed and humiliated. My parents kept calling, wanting to have serious conversations about my mental health and my past. Conversations that wouldn't have been necessary if Liz hadn't violated my trust. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. Then I started noticing something odd about Liz. She'd always been glued to her phone, but lately it was different. She'd get texts and immediately flip her phone over. She'd excuse herself to take calls in another room. When her husband was around, she barely touched it, but the second he left, she was typing away frantically. It was the kind of behavior you develop when you're hiding something. I wasn't trying to catch her in anything. Honestly, I was just paying attention because I was angry and hyper-aware of everything she did. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. Something was off. A few weeks later, she asked to borrow my car. Hers was in the shop, something about the transmission. I said fine, whatever. When I went to pick it up from her place the next day, she'd already left in my car and left hers in the driveway, with the keys on the kitchen counter. I sat in her car for a minute, and I don't know what possessed me, but I opened the glove compartment. Maybe I was looking for proof that she was human. That perfect Liz had flaws too. Maybe I was just being petty. What I found was so much worse than I expected. Hotel receipts, multiple ones, from a place about 30 minutes outside of town, all from weekday afternoons, and tucked in with the insurance papers was her phone bill. And I could see hundreds of texts to one number that wasn't saved in her contacts. Just digits. I pulled out my phone and checked her car's Bluetooth history. There was a name I didn't recognize paired to the system. I Googled it. Her yoga instructor. Some guy named Devon who ran classes at the community center where she volunteered. My hands were shaking. I took pictures of everything. The receipts, the phone bill, everything. Then I put it all back exactly how I found it. That night I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt guilty for snooping, but the bigger part of me remembered her sitting at that dinner table, calmly destroying my reputation while our parents watched. She'd used my secrets as weapons. She'd painted me as unstable and dishonest, and the whole time she was sneaking around behind her husband's back, lying to everyone. The hypocrisy was staggering. I sat on the information for a week. I kept asking myself if I really wanted to do this, if I wanted to be the person who blew up her life the way she'd tried to blow up mine. But every time my parents called with another concerned question about my mental health, every time I remembered the look on Liz's face when she outed my private struggles, the answer became clearer. Then came the breaking point. My mom called and said Liz had suggested I see a therapist, that she was worried about me and thought I needed professional help. She was still playing the concerned sister card, still positioning herself as the responsible one, looking out for her messy younger sibling. That's when I knew she wasn't going to stop. She'd found a narrative that worked for her, one where she was the hero and I was the problem, and she was going to milk it for everything it was worth. I called my parents and asked them to come over, told them I had something important to show them. When they arrived, I laid out everything, the hotel receipts, the phone records, the timeline that made it impossible to deny. I showed them the name of the yoga instructor and pulled up his social media, where Liz had liked dozens of his posts. My dad's face went grey. My mum started crying. They confronted Liz that same day. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. She tried to deny it at first, then broke down and admitted everything. The affair had been going on for almost 8 months. Her husband, the pastor, was devastated. The church community found out within days. Her perfect image shattered completely. She called me 2 days later, sobbing, begged me not to tell anyone else, said her marriage was hanging by a thread, and if this got out any further, she'd lose everything. She actually had the audacity to ask me to protect her, to keep her secret. I told her exactly what I thought. You don't get to destroy me and expect protection. You weaponize my vulnerabilities in front of our entire family. You called me unstable. You tried to paint me as the problem while you were lying to everyone. I didn't go looking for this. I found it by accident. But once I had it, there was no way I was letting you keep playing the perfect sister while I carried the weight of your judgment. She kept crying, kept begging. I hung up. Her marriage didn't survive. Last I heard, they're divorced and she moved to a different town. Our parents don't talk about her much anymore. The golden child fell hard, and I can't say I feel bad about it. You reap what you sow. She sowed betrayal and cruelty. She harvested exactly what she deserved. But wait until you hear what happens when someone crashes your celebration with the last person you'd ever want to see. The engagement party was supposed to be perfect, and for about 45 minutes it actually was. Our families were mingling, the champagne was flowing. Sarah looked incredible in this midnight blue dress she'd been planning for weeks. People were toasting us, sharing embarrassing stories, laughing. I remember standing there thinking this was it. This was the life we were building together. Then I saw him, Liam, standing by the bar like he belonged there, chatting with Sarah's cousin, drink in hand, looking completely comfortable. My brain short-circuited for a second. Liam was Sarah's ex, the one she'd dated for 4 years before me, the one whose name had come up exactly twice in our entire relationship, both times when she assured me he was ancient history and I had nothing to worry about. And now he was at our engagement party, casual as anything, like this was totally normal. I felt this cold weight drop into my stomach. I scanned the room for Sarah and found her near the gift table, laughing with some friends. I made my way over, probably walking faster than I should have, trying to keep my expression neutral, even though my heart was hammering. I pulled her aside, kept my voice low, asked her why Liam was here. She barely glanced in his direction before waving it off. Said her mum must have invited him without asking, that their families had stayed close even after the breakup, so it wasn't that weird. She squeezed my hand, smiled like this was no big deal, and started to turn back to her friends, but something felt off, really off. I found her mum near the dessert table, asked her as casually as I could manage about Liam being here. She looked genuinely confused, said she hadn't invited him, hadn't even thought to since Sarah had made it clear years ago that she wanted clean boundaries with her ex. She asked if there was a problem. I said no, just checking, and walked away before she could see my face. My hands were shaking. I went back to Sarah, pulled her into the hallway outside the main room, where we could talk without an audience. Asked her again, directly this time. Your mum didn't invite him, so why is he here? She got defensive immediately, said I was making a scene over nothing, that maybe one of her friends invited him. She didn't know. She hadn't personally sent him an invitation, but what did it matter? He was just another guest. I stared at her. We were supposed to be getting married, building a life together, and she was lying to my face at our own engagement party. And here's where it gets absurd. I told her I was going to ask Liam directly. She grabbed my arm, and for the first time since this conversation started, she looked actually worried. She said fine, okay, she'd invited him. But it wasn't what I thought. She'd invited him to prove something, to prove she'd moved on, to show him that she was happy, that she'd found someone better, that their breakup had been the right choice. She wanted closure, she said. She wanted him to see her in that blue dress, engaged to someone who treated her right, living her best life. I just stood there, trying to process the absolute audacity of what I was hearing. She'd turned our engagement party into some kind of performance for her ex, our celebration of us, of our future together, and she'd made it about him. I asked her if she understood how that made me feel, standing in a room full of people celebrating our love while she was busy proving a point to someone who shouldn't have mattered anymore. She started backtracking, saying I was overreacting, that it wasn't like that. She just wanted one night where she could show him she'd won. Won. Like our relationship was a competition, and I was the trophy. The thing about humiliation is that it has this specific weight to it. It's not just anger or hurt, it's this public exposure of something private. Everyone in that room thought we were solid, thought this was a happy occasion, and I was standing in a hallway realizing I'd been a prop in someone else's closure narrative. I walked back into the party, grabbed a spoon and tapped it against a glass until the room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, expecting another toast probably, smiling and raising their glasses. I thanked everyone for coming, said I appreciated them taking the time to celebrate with us tonight. Then I said the party was over and the engagement was off, effective immediately. You could have heard a pin drop. Sarah's face went white. Her mum looked like she might faint. My dad started toward me, but I shook my head. I explained calmly and clearly that I'd just learned my fiancée had invited her ex to our engagement party without telling me, in order to prove to him that she'd moved on. That I deserved a partner who didn't turn our milestones into performances for people who shouldn't matter anymore, and that I wasn't interested in building a marriage on that foundation. Sarah tried to cut in, stammering something about how I was embarrassing her, how we could talk about this privately. But I was done talking. I was done with private conversations where she'd spin another version of events that made me feel crazy for being upset. I pulled the ring box out of my pocket. I'd been carrying it around all night, planning to show it to people who asked about the proposal story. I walked over to her, placed it in her hand, and told her she could keep it or return it. I didn't care. Her family was in complete shock. A few people tried to approach me, but I just headed for the door. On my way out, I passed Liam, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He muttered something that might have been an apology. I kept walking. I heard Sarah behind me, heels clicking on the tile as she tried to catch up, calling my name, saying we needed to fix this, that she'd made a mistake, but we could work through it, that everyone was watching, and I was making this worse than it needed to be. I turned around one last time, told her the mistake wasn't inviting him. The mistake was thinking I'd be okay being used as a prop in her ex's closure story. The mistake was lying about it repeatedly instead of just being honest. And the biggest mistake was assuming I'd stick around after realizing I was never really the point of my own engagement party. Then I left, got in my car and drove to my brother's place, turned my phone off because I knew the calls and texts would start immediately, sat on his couch while he cracked open a beer and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I didn't really. There wasn't much to say. I'd spent months planning a future with someone who'd spent our engagement party trying to impress her ex. That pretty much said everything. My brother asked if I was sure, if this was really it, or if I'd calm down and reconsider. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything. Some things you can't come back from, and this was one of them. The next few days were chaos. Sarah called and texted non-stop. Her friends reached out trying to mediate. Her mom even showed up at my apartment with a whole speech about how much Sarah loved me and how everyone makes mistakes. I listened politely, then told her I appreciated her coming, but my decision was final. The gossip spread fast. Mutual friends took sides. Some people thought I'd overreacted, that I should have handled it privately instead of blowing up the party. Others said I'd dodged a bullet and they'd have done the same thing. Looking back, I don't regret it. Not the public call-out, not walking away, none of it. Because the alternative was marrying someone who thought our relationship milestones were opportunities to perform for an ex. And that's not a foundation you build a life on. I walked out of that party with my dignity intact. That's more than I would have had if I'd stayed. Speaking of exes showing up uninvited, sometimes jealousy isn't paranoia. It's your gut screaming the truth. I thought Josh and I were solid. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and for the most part, things felt right. He was attentive, funny. We had the same taste in music and movies. We talked about getting a place together someday. I genuinely believed we were building towards something real. Then the late night started. At first, it was just once a week. He'd go out with his friend group, come home around midnight, tell me about their night. Normal stuff, but then it became twice a week, then 3 times, and the explanations got vaguer. Just hanging out, just catching up, just the usual crew. I didn't think much of it initially. Everyone needs time with their friends. I had my own social life, but something felt off. The way he'd put his phone face down when I walked into the room. The way he'd get defensive if I asked who was there. The way his stories never quite added up when I'd pieced together the timeline. I asked him once, trying to keep my voice casual, who exactly was in this friend group. He rattled off some names: Ryan, Mike, Jordan, and Emma. I paused. Emma, as in his ex Emma? The one he dated for 3 years before me? He said yes, but it wasn't like that. They were friends now. It had been years. I needed to trust him. So I tried. I really did. But every time he went out with that group, my stomach would twist. I'd lie awake waiting for him to come home, trying to convince myself I was being irrational. He told me I was overthinking it, that I was being insecure, that if I really trusted him, this wouldn't be an issue. I started to believe him, started thinking maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too jealous, too controlling, too damaged from past relationships to see that this was normal. He was so convincing, so calm and reasonable when he told me I was overreacting. I felt like I was losing my mind. But that wasn't even the worst part. The late nights got later. Midnight became 2 in the morning. 2 became him not coming home until dawn. And every time I questioned it, he'd sigh like I was exhausting him. He'd say I was being paranoid, that he was just having fun with friends, and I was trying to control who he could hang out with. He made me feel like the villain in our relationship. I talked to my best friend about it. She said it sounded sketchy, that his defensiveness was a red flag, but I defended him. I told her she didn't understand, that he'd never given me a real reason not to trust him. Looking back, I can't believe how deep I was in the gaslighting. Then came the night that changed everything. Josh told me he was having a guys' night. Just him, Ryan, and Mike. Watching the game, having some beers, the usual. He kissed me goodbye, said he'd be back late, and left. I settled in for a night of Netflix and trying not to spiral into anxiety. Around 10, I got a notification on my phone. One of those location sharing alerts. We'd set it up months ago for safety reasons, back when we were planning a road trip. I'd honestly forgotten it was still active. The notification said Josh's location had updated. I opened it expecting to see Ryan's address or some sports bar. Instead, it showed an apartment complex across town, an address I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up Instagram, found Emma's profile, scrolled back through her posts until I found one where she'd tagged her location. Same address. My heart stopped. He was at Emma's apartment, on guys' night. The guys' night that was supposed to be just him and Ryan and Mike. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, staring at my phone, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the whole group was there. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe there was an explanation. But deep down I knew. I'd known for months. I'd just been too scared to admit it. I grabbed my keys and drove over. The whole way there, my hands were shaking. Part of me hoped I was wrong, hoped I'd get there and find out it really was the whole friend group, and I'd feel stupid for doubting him. But another part of me, the part that had been screaming at me for months that something was wrong, knew exactly what I was going to find. I parked outside her building. His car was there. I walked up to her apartment, stood outside the door for what felt like forever, and knocked. Footsteps. The door opened, and there he was, shirtless, hair messy, eyes wide with panic. Behind him, I could see Emma pulling a blanket around herself on the couch. He started stammering immediately. It wasn't what it looked like. They were just talking. He'd spilled a drink on his shirt. The AC was broken, so it was hot. Every excuse tumbling out one after another, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, at this person I'd spent 2 years with, this person who'd convinced me I was crazy for trusting my own instincts. And I felt nothing, just this overwhelming sense of clarity. I said, "You're right. I was too jealous. I deserve better." And I walked away. I heard him calling after me, heard him running down the hallway, but I didn't turn around. I got in my car and drove home. The second I got inside my apartment, I blocked his number, blocked him on every social media platform, deleted every photo. I wasn't interested in the explanations or the apologies or the inevitable promises that it would never happen again. He tried everything to get in touch, called from different numbers, showed up at my apartment, sent messages through mutual friends, but I was done. Every attempt just reinforced that I'd made the right choice. The hard part wasn't leaving, it was dealing with the aftermath, the self-doubt, the wondering if I'd overreacted. The replaying of every fight where he'd called me insecure, wondering if he'd been right. It took therapy and time and a lot of support from friends to realize that trusting your gut isn't the same as being jealous, that asking questions isn't controlling, that I hadn't been crazy at all. 3 months later, a mutual friend told me Emma had dumped Josh. Apparently, she'd found out he'd been talking to someone else behind her back. The irony was almost poetic. He'd blown up our relationship for her, and she'd done to him exactly what he'd done to me. I didn't feel vindicated or happy about it. I just felt tired, tired of the whole mess, tired of thinking about someone who treated me like I was disposable. Looking back, the signs were all there from the beginning. But when you're in it, when someone you love is telling you you're wrong to feel what you're feeling, it's hard to see clearly. You start doubting yourself instead of doubting them. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you question your own reality until you can't trust yourself anymore. But here's what I learned. Your instincts exist for a reason. That feeling in your gut, the one that tells you something's wrong even when you can't prove it, that's your brain putting together patterns you haven't consciously noticed yet. And when someone makes you feel crazy for listening to it, that's probably because they know you're right. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. Now back to the story, because trust me, the drama doesn't stop there. Actually, for me, it did stop there. I cut Josh out completely and moved on, but the lesson stuck. I'm more careful now, more willing to trust myself, more willing to walk away when something feels wrong, even if I can't articulate exactly why. Josh taught me what I don't want, what I won't accept, and in a weird way, I'm grateful for that, because now I know what real respect looks like. And it doesn't involve being made to feel insane for having basic boundaries. Karma's real. Emma figured that out. And somewhere out there, Josh is probably still wondering why nobody trusts him. The answer's pretty simple, because he proved he can't be trusted. But sometimes the lies aren't just about who they're seeing, they're about who they really are. I met Alex at a networking event 3 years ago. They had this magnetic confidence, the kind that makes you want to lean in and listen. They talked about building their company from the ground up, about getting their business degree while working full-time, about overcoming obstacles and creating something meaningful. I was impressed, more than impressed. I was captivated. We started dating a few weeks later. Alex was everything I thought I wanted. Driven, articulate, successful. They had stories for everything. How they'd landed their first investor, how they'd negotiated their first major deal, how they'd turned a failing startup into something profitable. I believed every word. Our relationship moved fast. Within a year, we were living together. Within 2, we were talking about marriage. My family loved them. My friends thought we were the perfect match. Alex fit seamlessly into my life, and I thought I fit into theirs. Then I got the message. It came from someone named Marcus, someone I'd never heard of. The message was brief, said he was an old friend of Alex's and needed to talk to me urgently, that there were things I should know before making any permanent decisions. He included his phone number. My first instinct was to delete it. It felt like drama, like someone trying to stir up trouble. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the formal tone. Maybe it was the fact that he'd used the word permanent. I sat on it for a day, then called. Marcus was careful with his words. He said he'd known Alex for almost a decade, that they'd been close once before Alex cut ties and moved to a new city. He said he'd seen my engagement announcement on social media and felt morally obligated to reach out. Then he started listing things. The business degree Alex claimed to have, never completed. They'd attended for 2 semesters and dropped out. The self-made entrepreneur story, they'd been fired from their previous company for financial irregularities and had taken their severance to start the new business. And the clean record they'd always implied? There was a fraud charge from 6 years ago that had been plea bargained down to a misdemeanor. I told Marcus he was lying, that Alex would have told me these things, that we were building a life together and there was no way they'd hide something that significant. He said he understood my reaction, but he had proof if I wanted it. Court documents, college transcripts, emails. I didn't want to believe him, but I also couldn't ignore it. I told him to send everything. The files came through that night, public records mostly, court documents showing the plea deal, a statement from the college confirming Alex had attended but never graduated, articles about the company Alex had worked for, mentioning the layoffs and investigations into financial mismanagement. It was all there, verifiable, undeniable. I confronted Alex the next day, laid out everything Marcus had sent, watched their face go through about 5 different emotions before they settled on devastated. They didn't deny it. They just sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them, and eventually started crying. They said they'd wanted to reinvent themselves, that their past was full of mistakes they weren't proud of, that when they met me, they saw a chance to be the person they'd always wanted to be. They said the lies had started small and then snowballed, that they'd been terrified I'd leave if I knew the truth. I asked why they didn't just tell me. We'd been together for almost 3 years. We were talking about getting married. At what point were they planning to come clean? They didn't have an answer, just kept saying they were sorry, that they loved me, that they'd do anything to make this right. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started digging on my own. If Alex had lied about these things, what else had they hidden? I went through old emails, social media accounts, anything I could access, and I found it. Evidence of a previous marriage, someone named Jordan, from about 7 years ago. Divorce papers dated 2 years before I'd met Alex. I confronted them again. This time they barely tried to defend themselves, just admitted it, said it had been a short marriage, a mistake, and they'd wanted to pretend it never happened. That, including it in their past, would have made them look unstable. I felt like I'd been living with a stranger. Every story they told me, every piece of their history, all of it was either exaggerated or completely fabricated. The person I thought I knew didn't exist. They were a carefully constructed character, and I'd fallen in love with a performance. The betrayal was suffocating, not just because they'd lied, but because they'd let me build my entire future around a fantasy. I'd introduced them to my family as someone they weren't. I'd defended their character to friends. I'd planned a wedding with someone whose real past I didn't even know. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I made a decision. If Alex had built their new life on lies, then the people invested in that life deserved to know the truth. I wasn't going to quietly walk away and let them keep spinning their story, not when my own reputation was tied to theirs. I contacted mutual friends first, sent them the same documentation Marcus had sent me, explained that Alex had been lying about fundamental parts of their identity and that I thought they should know before investing any more time or trust. Some people thanked me, others accused me of being vindictive. I didn't care. They deserved the truth. Then I contacted Alex's business partners, sent a carefully worded email explaining that I'd discovered significant misrepresentations in Alex's background, including their educational credentials and previous legal issues. I attached the relevant documents and said I felt they had a right to know who they were in business with. Finally, I told my family, showed them everything, watched my parents' faces fall as they realized the person they'd welcomed into our lives had been lying from day one. My dad asked if I was sure I wanted to blow this up so publicly. I told him I was sure, that I'd spent 3 years living in someone else's fiction, and I wasn't going to let that continue. Alex's reputation crumbled fast. The business partners started asking questions. Friends distanced themselves. People who'd admired Alex's success story started seeing it for what it was, a fabrication built on half-truths and omissions. Alex called me, begging me to stop. Said I was destroying everything they'd built. I told them they'd destroyed it themselves the moment they decided to build it on lies, that I was just making sure the foundation was visible to everyone else. Within 2 months, Alex had moved to a different city, started over somewhere else, presumably with a new set of lies. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd rebranded their business and scrubbed their social media. Same person, different story. I spent the next year rebuilding my life on honesty. It was harder than I expected, not just the practical stuff like untangling our finances and moving out, but the emotional work of learning to trust again. Alex had made me doubt my own judgment, made me wonder how I'd missed so many red flags. Therapy helped, so did time, and eventually, I stopped feeling angry and just felt sad. Sad that someone I'd loved had been so afraid of their own past that they'd rather lie to everyone around them than face it. Sad that we could have had something real if they'd just been honest from the start. But mostly, I felt relieved. Relieved that I'd found out before the wedding, before kids, before I'd invested even more of my life into a relationship built on fiction. Marcus had done me a favor, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. These days, I'm careful about who I let in. I ask more questions, I verify stories, I trust my instincts when something feels off, and I don't ignore red flags just because I want the story to be true. Alex taught me that you can't build a real relationship on a fake foundation. Eventually, the cracks show, and when they do, everything comes down. And if you think random strangers are safer than partners, think again. Sometimes the worst betrayals come in your DMs. I was making dinner when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it, figured it was spam, but something made me look. What I saw made my hands go numb. Screenshots, lots of them. My husband Tom's face in a dating app profile picture. Messages between him and someone saved as just the letter J. The messages weren't subtle. They were explicit, graphic, plans to meet up, compliments about photos I couldn't see but could imagine. And the timestamps were recent, like within the past week, recent. I stood there in the kitchen, chicken sizzling in the pan behind me, staring at my phone like it had just detonated in my hands. My brain couldn't process it. This had to be fake, some kind of joke or mistake or, I don't know, elaborate prank. Tom and I had been married for 6 years. We had problems like any couple, sure, but this wasn't us. I scrolled through every screenshot. There had to be 15 of them. Different conversations, different days, but always the same 2 people. Tom and Jay. The profile said he was single. Listed interest I recognized as his. Had photos I'd taken of him on our last vacation. The anonymous sender hadn't included any message. Just the screenshots. No explanation. No context. Just evidence dropped into my lap like a bomb. I turned off the stove. I couldn't think about dinner. Couldn't think about anything except those messages. The casual way he'd typed them. The ease with which he'd lied about being single. The fact that he had an active dating profile while I was at home cooking him dinner like an idiot. Tom got home an hour later. Normal greeting. Asked what smelled good. Kissed me on the cheek. I watched him do it and felt like I was looking at a stranger. I waited until he sat down. Then I handed him my phone without saying a word. His face went white, then red. Then he started talking fast, too fast, tripping over his words. It wasn't real. Someone photoshopped it. It was an old profile he'd forgotten to delete. Someone was trying to mess with us. He didn't know who Jay was. This was crazy. I asked him one question. Can I see your phone? He hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. Then he said no. Said I was being paranoid, that if I didn't trust him, there was no point. That he wasn't going to prove himself to me like some criminal. That's when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. If he had nothing to hide, he'd have handed over his phone immediately. Would have been eager to prove the screenshots were fake. But instead he was deflecting, getting angry, making this about my trust issues instead of his behavior. I told him to sleep on the couch. He tried to argue, but I walked into our bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my phone, reading through those screenshots again and again, looking for some detail I'd missed that would make this make sense. There wasn't one. It was exactly what it looked like. I didn't sleep. I lay there all night listening to Tom moving around in the living room, my mind racing through every moment of the past year, trying to figure out when this started, how I'd missed it, what I'd done wrong. Then I remembered I hadn't done anything wrong. He had. I called a lawyer first thing in the morning, explained the situation, sent over the screenshots. She said they'd be useful in the divorce proceedings, especially if we were in a fault state. She asked if I wanted to try to gather more evidence, or if what I had was enough. It was enough. More than enough. But that wasn't even the worst part. During the discovery process, my lawyer subpoenaed Tom's phone records and device history. What came back was worse than I'd imagined. He hadn't just been on one dating app. He'd been on 4. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, and one I'd never even heard of. And he'd been active on all of them for over a year. A year. While we'd been going to couples' dinners, planning weekend trips, talking about maybe starting a family, he'd been shopping around the entire time. The messages my lawyer uncovered made the original screenshots look tame. Meetups at hotels, lies about business trips that were actually dates, money spent on other people that came out of our joint account. It was systematic, calculated. He'd been living a completely separate life, and I'd had no idea. I felt like the dumbest person alive. How had I not seen it? How had I trusted him so completely when he'd been lying to my face every single day? The divorce was brutal. He fought me on everything, tried to claim the evidence was obtained illegally, tried to argue that emotional affairs weren't grounds for fault, even tried to say I'd driven him to it by being distant, which was rich considering I'd had no idea anything was wrong until screenshots landed in my lap. His lawyer pushed for reconciliation, said people make mistakes, that counseling could save the marriage. I laughed, actually laughed in the mediation room. There was nothing to save. The marriage had been over the second he created that first profile. I'd just been the last one to know. The settlement took 4 months. He tried to drag it out, hoping I'd give up or give in, but I was done being accommodating. My lawyer was ruthless, and honestly, so was I. He'd burned every bridge. I wasn't about to make his landing soft. Things went from bad to unhinged when he showed up at my new apartment one night. Drunk, demanding to talk, said I was being unreasonable, that everyone makes mistakes, that I was throwing away 6 years over nothing. I called the police, got a restraining order, made it clear that we'd communicate through lawyers only, and if he violated that, I'd make sure everyone we knew understood exactly why our marriage ended. He finally signed the papers 2 weeks later. The whole thing felt surreal, like I'd been living in a movie and suddenly realized none of it was real. The person I'd trusted most had been a complete fabrication, and I'd bought it, completely. About a month after everything was finalized, I got another message from that same unknown number. This time there was text. It said, "Thought you deserved to know." He did the same thing to me. Signed, Jay's ex. So the anonymous sender wasn't some good Samaritan looking out for me. It was someone who'd been cheated on by Jay, found out Jay was involved with a married man, and decided to blow up both relationships as payback. An unlikely hero, honestly. I never responded, but I thought about that person sometimes. Wondered if they felt better after sending those screenshots. If destroying 2 relationships had given them any peace. I decided it didn't matter. Their motivations didn't change the outcome. Tom had made his choices. I'd made mine. And now we both had to live with the consequences. I'm not going to pretend the divorce didn't mess me up. It did. I spent months in therapy, working through trust issues and self-blame, and all the emotional wreckage that comes with discovering your entire relationship was a lie. But I came out the other side, and honestly, I'm better off, because now I know what red flags look like. I know what my boundaries are. And I know I'll never again ignore my gut when something feels wrong. Tom reached out once, about 6 months later, said he was sorry, that he'd been going through something and handled it badly, that he missed me. I deleted the message without responding. Some apologies come too late. Some bridges once burned aren't worth rebuilding. Technology can expose the truth, but it can also be weaponized against you in the worst ways possible. I thought the breakup was clean. Jordan and I had been together for about a year and a half, and when things ended, it wasn't dramatic. We'd grown apart, wanted different things, had that conversation where you both acknowledge it's not working anymore. We agreed to stay civil, keep mutual friends out of it, and move on like adults. I actually respected them for how maturely they handled it. That respect lasted about 3 weeks. Then I started noticing something strange. Friends were acting weird around me, distant. A few stopped responding to texts altogether. When I ran into people at coffee shops or parties, they'd give me these tight, uncomfortable smiles and find excuses to leave the conversation. I couldn't figure out what I'd done. I replayed every recent interaction, wondering if I'd said something offensive without realizing it. Nothing made sense. Finally, one of my closer friends, Marcus, pulled me aside. He looked uncomfortable, like he really didn't want to be having this conversation. He asked me, point blank, if I'd been abusive to Jordan during our relationship. I just stared at him. What? Where was this coming from? He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots, messages that supposedly came from me. Texts where I was calling Jordan names, threatening them, saying horrible manipulative things. My name was at the top, my profile picture, but I'd never sent any of those messages, not a single one. I told Marcus that immediately. Those aren't real. I never said any of that. He looked skeptical but said he wanted to believe me. Then he mentioned that he wasn't the only one who'd received these screenshots. Jordan had been sharing them with pretty much everyone in our social circle, explaining to people that I'd been emotionally abusive throughout the relationship, and they were finally free. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. This person I'd trusted, someone I'd shared a life with for over a year, was actively destroying my reputation with fabricated evidence, and people were believing it, because why wouldn't they? The screenshots looked real, They had timestamps, message threads, everything you'd expect. If I hadn't known for a fact that I'd never sent those messages, even I might have believed them. I went home and started going through my own phone. Checked every conversation I'd ever had with Jordan. Nothing even remotely close to what was in those screenshots existed in my actual message history. These weren't taken out of context or misinterpreted. They were completely fabricated, doctored, fake. That's when I realized I needed help beyond just telling people the truth, because my word against manufactured evidence wasn't going to cut it. I hired a lawyer. Cost me more money than I wanted to spend, but this was my entire social life, my reputation, potentially my career if this spread far enough. The lawyer recommended a tech expert who specialized in digital forensics, and here's where it gets absurd. The tech expert took one look at the screenshots and started pointing out inconsistencies. The metadata was wrong. The timestamps didn't align with when I'd actually been online. The font rendering was slightly off in some messages, suggesting they'd been edited in an image manipulation program. There were pixel artifacts around certain words that wouldn't exist in genuine screenshots. He built an entire report, page by page, proving these images had been doctored. But I didn't stop there, because if Jordan had done this to me, I wanted to know if they'd done it before. I started digging, found an online support group for people who'd been victims of reputation destruction after breakups, posted my story, and within days, 3 people reached out. All of them had dated Jordan. All of them had the same story. Doctored screenshots, fabricated abuse allegations, systematic destruction of their social circles. One person had lost their job over it. Another had been forced to move cities because the rumors got so bad. They all had evidence. Screenshots of Jordan's patterns, timelines, even some of the same manipulation tactics. I compiled everything into a dossier. The forensic analysis of my screenshots, the testimonies from Jordan's previous exes. A timeline showing this was a repeated pattern of behavior, not a one-time emotional response to a breakup. Then I made copies, sent the full dossier to every mutual friend who'd received the fake screenshots, sent it to Jordan's employer because if they were willing to do this in their personal life, their professional ethics were questionable too. And then I did something I'd been debating for weeks. I posted a public statement. I laid it all out. What had happened, the proof that the screenshots were fabricated, the pattern of behavior with previous partners. I didn't sensationalize it. I didn't add dramatic commentary. I just presented the facts, backed up with evidence that anyone could verify. The response was immediate. Friends started reaching out, apologizing. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry that they'd been manipulated. A few admitted they'd had doubts about the screenshots, but hadn't wanted to get involved. Marcus called me almost in tears, saying he should have trusted his gut and questioned it harder from the beginning. But that wasn't even the worst part. Jordan's new partner, someone they'd started dating pretty quickly after we broke up, reached out to me directly. They'd seen my post, and they'd been experiencing weird behavior from Jordan too. Isolating tactics, stories about their exes that seemed designed to make them dependent and distrustful of other people. Once they saw the pattern laid out in my dossier, everything clicked into place. They left Jordan that same week. Jordan tried damage control, posted their own statement claiming I was the real manipulator, that I'd fabricated the evidence against them, that this was all an elaborate revenge scheme. But the forensic evidence was airtight, and once Jordan's previous exes started adding their voices, corroborating the pattern, Jordan's credibility completely fell apart. Their employer launched an investigation. I don't know all the details, but I heard through the grapevine that Jordan was let go shortly after. Something about ethics violations and concerns about trustworthiness in client-facing roles. The whole thing unraveled fast. Jordan's social media went dark. Mutual friends stopped defending them. The people who'd believed the fake screenshots reached out one by one, some with genuine apologies, others just quietly refollowing me on social media, like nothing had happened. I won't lie, it felt vindicating. But it also felt cold. This was someone I'd cared about, someone I'd built memories with, and they'd been willing to destroy me completely just to control the narrative of our breakup. The calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Justice felt necessary, but it didn't feel good. It felt like cleaning up a mess that never should have existed in the first place. I got my reputation back, but I also lost the ability to trust people the way I used to. Every new relationship, friendship, or romantic comes with this lingering question in the back of my mind. What happens if this goes wrong? What are they capable of when they're hurt or angry? The lawyer said I could pursue legal action if I wanted. Defamation, emotional distress, the works. But I was exhausted. I'd gotten what I needed. The truth was out there, backed by evidence, and Jordan's ability to hurt anyone else had been significantly reduced. I decided that was enough. Months later, I heard Jordan had moved to a different state, started over somewhere new where people didn't know the story. Part of me wonders if they're doing the same thing to someone else right now, building up trust just to tear someone down when it ends. I hope not. I genuinely hope they got help and changed, but I'm not naive enough to bet on it. The people who apologized, I forgave most of them. A few relationships never recovered, and that's okay. Some friendships aren't built to survive being tested like that. The ones who stuck around, who admitted they should have questioned things sooner, those relationships actually got stronger. I learned something important through all of this. Your reputation is only as strong as the truth backing it up. And when someone tries to destroy that with lies, you can't just defend yourself with words. You need evidence. You need to be willing to fight back strategically, calmly, and with receipts. Because emotional appeals don't beat fabricated screenshots. Cold, hard proof does. If Jordan taught me anything, it's that some people will burn your entire life down just to stay warm in their own narrative. And the only way to stop them is to bring the fire extinguisher of truth and make sure everyone sees exactly who started the fire. Family is supposed to have your back, but what happens when they bury secrets that rewrite your entire bloodline? I thought it would be fun, one of those DNA ancestry kits everyone was doing. My siblings had already done theirs, posted their results on social media, joked about being 12% this or 7% that. I figured why not. I ordered the kit, spit in the tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it for a few weeks. When the results came back, I opened them at dinner. My whole family was there. Mom, Dad, my 2 siblings. I pulled up the app on my phone, ready to compare my results with theirs, see what we had in common. I clicked on the family matches section first. The names that popped up made no sense. My siblings weren't listed as full siblings. They were listed as half siblings, and my dad wasn't there at all. I stared at the screen, refreshing it twice, thinking it was a glitch. My brother asked what was wrong. I turned the phone toward him, asked if his results had looked like this. He leaned in, frowned, and said no. His showed both our parents and both of us as full siblings. I looked at my mum. Her face had gone completely pale. She was gripping her fork so hard her knuckles were white. My dad was looking between me and her, clearly confused. I asked if there was something they needed to tell me. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then my mum stood up, said we needed to talk privately, and walked toward the living room. My dad followed. I sat there with my siblings, all of us just staring at each other, none of us understanding what was happening. When I finally went into the living room, my mum was crying, full-on sobbing, the kind where you can barely breathe. My dad had his arm around her, but he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. He told me to sit down. What came next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My mum admitted through tears that she'd had an affair, a brief one right before she and my dad got married. It had only lasted a few weeks, and she'd ended it before the wedding. She found out she was pregnant a month later. She'd assumed I was my dad's. She'd wanted me to be my dad's. But there had been doubt. And she'd never confirmed it because she was too scared of what the answer might be. I asked why she'd never told me. Why she'd let me grow up thinking my dad was my biological father when she knew there was a chance he wasn't. She said she'd convinced herself it didn't matter, that DNA didn't make a family, that my dad had raised me and loved me, and that was enough. But that wasn't even the worst part. My dad knew. He'd known the whole time. She'd told him about the affair before they got married, told him there was a chance I might not be his, and he'd married her anyway. He'd raised me anyway. They'd made a pact, right there before I was even born, that they would never tell me, that it would be their secret, and I would grow up never knowing. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My entire identity, everything I'd understood about who I was and where I came from, had been a lie, and they'd both decided together that I didn't deserve to know the truth. I asked who my biological father was. My mum hesitated, then said his name. A family friend, someone I'd known growing up, someone who'd come to birthdays and holidays and graduations, someone who'd passed away 3 years ago. He'd known too. He had to have known. He'd watched me grow up, watched me call another man dad, and he'd never said a word. None of them had. My siblings didn't know what to say. They tried to be supportive, but I could see it in their eyes. I wasn't fully their sibling anymore. We didn't share the same father. Our connection had been redefined by a DNA test and a 30-year-old secret, and nothing would ever be the same. My dad tried to reassure me. He said nothing had changed. He'd raised me. He loved me. Biology didn't matter. But everything had changed. I looked at him and wondered how much of his love had been real and how much had been obligation. How much had been guilt for the choice my mum made. I hated that I was even thinking that way, but I couldn't stop. Family dinners became unbearable. The tension was suffocating. Everyone was trying too hard to act normal, and it made everything worse. My siblings would start conversations and then trail off, like they weren't sure if they should include me the same way anymore. My mum couldn't look me in the eye. My dad kept trying to have deep conversations about fatherhood and love, and how none of this mattered, but it felt performative, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I started making excuses not to come over. Work got busy, I had plans, I wasn't feeling well. Anything to avoid sitting in that house, surrounded by people who decided my entire origin story for me without ever giving me a choice. Then came the identity crisis. I'd spent 28 years thinking I knew who I was. I had my dad's nose, or so I'd always thought. I had his sense of humor, his work ethic, except none of that was genetic. It was learned. And suddenly I was wondering what parts of me were actually me, and what parts were just me trying to fit into a family I'd never fully belonged to. I started looking at photos of my biological father, trying to see myself in his features, wondering what he'd been like, what traits I might have inherited, if he'd ever wanted to tell me. If he'd struggled with the secret the way my parents claimed they had. I couldn't ask him. He was gone, and that felt like another betrayal. I'd lost the chance to know him, to understand that part of myself, because everyone had decided lying was easier than honesty. My mum tried to explain herself multiple times. She'd call, leave long voicemails about how scared she'd been, how young and stupid and desperate to make her life work, how she'd thought she was protecting me. I listened to some of them, deleted others without hearing them through. I didn't have the energy to absolve her. My dad sent letters, actual handwritten letters about how he'd never regretted raising me, how I was his son in every way that mattered, how he'd do it all over again the same way. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But another part kept thinking, if it didn't matter, why did you lie? I moved away 6 months later, took a job in another state, found a new apartment, started over. I needed distance, needed space to figure out who I was without the weight of their expectations and their guilt and their decades of deception pressing down on me. Therapy helped, talking to someone who had no stake in the situation, who could just listen without trying to fix it or explain it away. My therapist said grief comes in a lot of forms, and sometimes you grieve the life you thought you had, the story you thought was true. I grieved. I'm still grieving in some ways. We're rebuilding now, slowly. I talk to my dad every few weeks, short calls, surface level stuff, but it's something. My mom and I are working through it, though there's still this distance between us that I don't know will ever fully close. My siblings and I are okay, but it's different now. We're different. The foundation is forever cracked. You can patch it, reinforce it, build on top of it, but you always know it's there. That fracture line running through everything. Some days it doesn't matter. Other days it's all I can see. I don't regret taking the DNA test. I deserve to know the truth, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything. But I do wish they'd told me themselves, on their terms, before a piece of technology forced their hand. I wish I'd grown up knowing, so I could have processed it over time instead of having my entire reality rewritten in one devastating conversation. Trust is fragile, families are fragile, and secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of destroying both. And sometimes those DNA secrets aren't just about you. They're being used against you by people you'd never suspect. I'd always been curious about my family history. My parents had some stories, bits and pieces about where our ancestors came from, but nothing concrete. So when those DNA ancestry tests started getting popular, I figured why not? It seemed like a fun way to learn more about my heritage, maybe connect with some distant relatives. I mentioned it casually at a family barbecue. My cousin Brian was there, and the second I brought it up, his whole demeanor changed. He got this weird look on his face and started asking a bunch of questions. Why did I want to do it? What was I hoping to find? Wasn't I worried about privacy? It felt intense for what should have been a casual conversation about ancestry. I brushed it off. Brian had always been a little odd, a little too invested in things that didn't concern him. I ordered the kit online and waited for it to arrive. 2 weeks later, I checked my mailbox and nothing. The tracking said it had been delivered, but there was no package. I contacted the company, thinking maybe it had been misdelivered or stolen by porch pirates. They sent a replacement, but I had this nagging feeling something wasn't right. This time, I didn't tell anyone. I tracked the package obsessively and grabbed it the second it arrived. Registered my kit immediately, sent the sample back, and waited for results. When they came in, I was expecting to see some percentages of European ancestry, maybe a few fourth cousins I'd never met. What I got instead was a notification that I had a close relative match, a half-sibling. I stared at the screen, completely confused. I'm an only child. My parents had been together since college. There was no way I had a half-sibling unless one of them had a secret past they'd never mentioned, which seemed impossible. But here was the data, telling me otherwise. I clicked on the match. Their profile was minimal, just a first name. Melissa. I sent her a message through the platform, trying to keep it casual but honest. Said I'd gotten a notification that we were related and was confused because I didn't know of any siblings. Asked if she'd be willing to talk. She responded within a day, and what she told me made my blood run cold. Melissa said she'd also been surprised by the match. She'd taken the test looking for biological family because she'd been adopted as a baby. But according to the DNA results, we weren't half-siblings. We weren't related at all. She'd matched with someone who'd used my name and information to register a kit. I asked her to send me screenshots of everything, the profile, the match details, all of it. And there it was, my name, my email address that I'd used for the first kit, the one that had gone missing. But the DNA wasn't mine. Someone had stolen my kit and submitted their own sample under my identity. And here's where it gets absurd. I started piecing it together. Brian's weird reaction when I'd mentioned the test, the stolen package, his random questions about what I was hoping to find. I looked back at Melissa's information. She'd been adopted from the same state where Brian's family lived. The timeline matched up with when his parents would have been in their early 20s. I reached out to Melissa again, asked if she'd be willing to share more details about her adoption. She sent me what she had. The adoption had been closed, but she had some basic information. Birth mother's first name, approximate location, general time frame. I did some digging into Brian's family history. His parents had always been cagey about certain things, and there'd been whispers over the years that maybe Brian had been adopted, but it was never confirmed. I found some old records, cross-referenced dates, and it started to click. Brian had been adopted. His parents had lied about it his whole life, told him he was their biological son. And now he was in the middle of some kind of inheritance situation with his grandparents' estate, an inheritance that was supposedly only for blood relatives. He'd stolen my DNA kit to hide his real heritage, used my name so that when he submitted his sample, it would come back showing connections to his adoptive family, not his biological one. He was trying to game the system, to maintain the lie that he was a biological descendant, so he could claim money that wasn't rightfully his. The audacity was genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. I contacted the DNA testing company first, explained what had happened, provided evidence that someone had used my information to submit a fraudulent sample. They launched an investigation immediately, pulled Brian's results, and flagged his account. Then I contacted Melissa, told her everything I'd figured out. She was angry, understandably. She'd been looking for real answers about her biological family, and instead she'd been caught up in someone else's scam. We agreed to stay in touch, and she said if I needed her testimony for anything, she'd provide it. Finally, I called a family meeting. My parents, Brian's parents, a few key aunts and uncles. I laid out everything. The stolen kit, the fake submission, the inheritance fraud. I had screenshots, documentation, everything. Brian tried to deny it at first, said I was making things up, that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But I had the proof. The testing company had confirmed the fraudulent submission came from his IP address. The timeline matched perfectly. There was no way to spin it. His parents were devastated. Not just because their son had committed fraud, but because the whole adoption secret came out in the process. Decades of lying, all exposed in one afternoon. The family fractured immediately. People took sides. Brian's parents were furious with me for exposing it publicly instead of coming to them privately. But I didn't owe them privacy. Brian had stolen from me, used my identity for fraud, and tried to manipulate an entire inheritance situation. He dragged me into his mess without my consent. The inheritance got tied up in legal proceedings. The grandparents' estate lawyers got involved once they found out about the fraud. Brian was cut out entirely, not just from the money, but from the family trust. His relationship with his adoptive parents imploded. Last I heard, they're barely speaking. And Melissa? She and I actually stayed in contact. She ended up finding her biological family through legitimate means, and we grabbed coffee a few times. She said in a weird way, Brian's scam had accidentally helped her because it pushed her to dig deeper on her own. Brian moved out of state about 6 months later, changed jobs, basically started over somewhere nobody knew the story. He's estranged from most of the family now. Some people think I was too harsh, that I should have handled it privately. But those people didn't have their identity stolen. They didn't get dragged into a fraud scheme without their knowledge. I did take another DNA test, properly this time, under my own name with my own sample. Got my actual ancestry results. They were far less dramatic than the whole situation with Brian, but at least they were real. Looking back, the whole thing feels surreal. The idea that someone would steal a DNA kit to maintain a lie about their heritage, to commit fraud for an inheritance, it's the kind of thing you'd read about and think nobody would actually do. But people surprise you, usually not in good ways. These days, I'm careful about my personal information. I don't announce when I'm expecting packages, and I definitely don't share family plans with cousins I barely trust. Brian made his choices. He could have been honest about his adoption, could have dealt with the inheritance situation legally. Instead, he chose deception and fraud, and now he gets to live with the consequences. But workplace chaos can rival family drama any day, especially when your boss is willing to steal your future for their own gain. I'd been working on this workflow system for 8 months. 8 months of late nights, weekend testing, countless revisions. It was designed to streamline our entire department's project management process, cutting turnaround time by almost 40%. I'd built it from scratch, tested every component, documented every step. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete overhaul that would save the company thousands of hours annually. My boss Carl knew about it from the beginning. I'd been updating him weekly, showing him progress reports, asking for feedback. He seemed supportive, encouraging even. Told me to keep pushing, that this could be big for both of us. I thought he meant we'd present it together, that he'd back me up when it was time to show the executives. Then came the executive presentation, the one I'd been preparing for. The one where I was supposed to demonstrate the system and explain how it worked, except Carl sent me an email the morning of, saying he'd handle the presentation himself, that I should focus on prepping the demo materials and he'd do the talking. He said it would be better coming from someone at his level, that executives respond better to management pitches. I didn't love it, but I trusted him. I thought he was going to present it as our work, as a team effort, maybe give me credit for the technical execution while he handled the business case. That seemed reasonable. I was so incredibly wrong. I sat in that conference room and watched Carl present my entire system as his own idea. He used my slides, my data, my terminology, and every single time the executives asked a question, he answered like he'd personally developed every aspect of it. He talked about the challenges he'd faced, the solutions he'd engineered, the testing he'd conducted. I was right there, sitting 3 feet away, and he didn't mention my name once. The executives loved it. They praised his innovation, his initiative, his vision. They talked about how this was exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership they valued. And Carl just smiled and accepted every compliment like he'd earned it. I felt physically sick. I wanted to interrupt to correct the record right there, but I was frozen. Couldn't process what was happening fast enough to formulate a response. By the time my brain caught up, the meeting was over and the executives were shaking Carl's hand, talking about what this meant for his career trajectory. 2 weeks later, Carl got promoted. New title, significant raise, corner office, all because of my work. I was livid. I went to his office, closed the door, and confronted him directly. Told him he'd stolen my work and taken credit for something he had zero part in creating. He looked me dead in the eye and said I was overreacting. That management always presents team projects. That I'd contributed, sure, but the strategic vision was his. That if I wanted credit, I should have been more vocal during the presentation. The audacity was breathtaking. He deliberately sidelined me, presented my work as his own, and was now gaslighting me about my role in creating it. I left his office shaking with anger, but more than anger, I felt this cold, calculating determination. If Carl wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too, and I had something he didn't. Evidence. See, I'm meticulous about documentation. Every project I work on, I keep detailed records. Emails, drafts with timestamps, version histories, meeting notes. It's partly professional habit and partly paranoia, but in this case it was about to become my nuclear option. I went through everything, 8 months of emails where I'd outlined ideas, asked for feedback, provided updates, drafts of the workflow system showing clear progression from initial concept to final product, timestamps proving I'd been the one doing the work, often at hours when Carl wasn't even online, meeting notes where he'd explicitly acknowledged it was my project. I organized it all chronologically, built a timeline that showed beyond any doubt that I had conceived, designed, built, and tested this system entirely on my own. That Carl's only contribution had been approving my progress and ultimately stealing credit. Then I requested a meeting with Carl's new boss and HR, both of them. I said I had concerns about proper attribution of work and wanted to discuss it formally. They scheduled it for the following week. I showed up with printed documentation, digital backups, and a presentation that methodically walked through every piece of evidence. I didn't editorialize, didn't get emotional, just laid out the facts, showed the timestamps, and let the evidence speak for itself. Carl's boss looked progressively more uncomfortable as I went through each item. HR was taking notes furiously. When I finished, there was this heavy silence. Then Carl's boss asked if Carl had been present during the development of this system. I said yes, as my supervisor receiving updates, but that he'd contributed no actual work to its creation. They said they'd investigate, and here's where it gets absurd. The investigation took 3 days. They pulled server logs showing when files were created and modified. They reviewed email chains. They interviewed other team members who'd seen me working on the project, and every single piece of evidence confirmed exactly what I'd told them. Carl tried to defend himself, claimed he'd provided strategic guidance that was essential to the project's success, but when they asked him to provide any documentation of this guidance, he couldn't produce a single email, note, or message, because it didn't exist. He'd literally just supervised my regular work and then stolen the final product. The fallout was swift. Carl was demoted back to his previous position, placed on formal probation, lost the corner office, the raise, the shiny new title, and I got offered the promotion he'd briefly held, with back pay calculated from when he'd originally received it. HR made it clear this was a serious ethics violation, that if Carl hadn't been a long-term employee, he would have been terminated immediately. As it was, he was on thin ice. I accepted the promotion, moved into that corner office, and had to endure about 2 weeks of Carl still being in the department, shooting me looks that could kill, before he finally resigned. He sent a company-wide email about pursuing other opportunities. Everyone knew what had really happened. Word spreads fast in office environments, especially when it's this dramatic. His reputation was destroyed. He'd been exposed as someone who'd steal credit from his own team members, and that's not something you come back from professionally. People asked me if I felt bad, if I thought maybe I'd been too harsh. I didn't. Carl had made a calculated choice to steal my work, to let me sit there silently while he accepted praise for something I'd created. He'd gambled that I wouldn't fight back, and he lost. The whole experience taught me something valuable. Document everything. Every idea, every contribution, every bit of work you do, because you never know when someone you trust is going to decide your accomplishments look better on their resume. I also learned that sometimes the system works, Sometimes HR and upper management actually care about fairness and will correct injustices when presented with clear evidence. It's not always a lost cause. Carl's career never recovered. Last I heard, he was working at a much smaller company in a lower position than he'd had before all this happened. Meanwhile, I'm still in that corner office, still developing new systems, and still keeping meticulous records of everything I do. Trust is earned. Carl proved he couldn't be trusted, and he paid for it. And when even HR turns against you, that's when things get truly dark. I'd worked at the company for almost 5 years when it happened. I was good at my job, had solid performance reviews, got along with my team. I thought I was building a career there. Then I got assigned to a project with Director Mitchell, one of the senior leaders in our division. He had a reputation for being demanding but effective. What people didn't mention was that he was also a creep. It started small, comments about my appearance, standing too close during meetings, touches on my shoulder that lasted too long. I tried to brush it off, tried to be professional, but it escalated. He started sending messages after hours, inappropriate ones, suggesting we grab drinks alone, making jokes about what we could accomplish if I was more friendly. I documented everything, screenshotted the messages, noted the dates and times of uncomfortable interactions, and then I went to HR. The woman who took my complaint seemed sympathetic, said they took these matters seriously, that they'd launch an investigation immediately. She asked me to send her all my documentation, which I did. Then she told me to be patient while they looked into it. 2 weeks went by. Nothing. I followed up. She said the investigator was still gathering information. Another week. Still nothing. I asked who was handling the investigation. She hesitated, then said it was being managed by their internal compliance officer, Richard. I looked Richard up on the company directory, his LinkedIn, his social media, and there it was. Photos of him and Director Mitchell at charity golf tournaments, at company retreats. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends. The person investigating my sexual harassment complaint was the harasser's golf buddy. I went back to HR, pointed this out, said there was an obvious conflict of interest, and I needed someone impartial handling this. The HR rep got defensive, said Richard was a professional and his personal relationships didn't impact his ability to do his job, that I needed to trust the process. I didn't trust the process. I trusted what I could see, which was a system designed to protect the company and its high performers, not the people they hurt. A month after I filed my complaint, it officially disappeared. The HR rep told me they'd completed their investigation and found insufficient evidence to support my claims, that Director Mitchell denied everything, and there were no witnesses to corroborate my story. The messages I'd sent? Taken out of context, apparently. My documented pattern of his behavior? Not compelling enough. Case closed. Then the retaliation started. My performance review, which had been stellar for years, suddenly tanked. I was criticized for things that had never been issues before. My communication style was too aggressive. My project management needed work. I wasn't a team player. All vague, subjective criticisms that were impossible to defend against. I got pulled from the high-visibility projects I'd been leading and reassigned to grunt work. My name stopped appearing in leadership emails. When I tried to speak up in meetings, I was talked over or ignored. It was systematic, calculated, and it was working. I started looking for other jobs, but in the meantime, I did something else. I started paying attention to patterns. I wasn't the only person who'd been pushed out after crossing someone powerful. There was a woman in finance who'd left abruptly after reporting her manager. A guy in operations who'd complained about discriminatory practices and suddenly got a bad performance review. It kept happening. I started quietly reaching out to former employees, people who'd left under similar circumstances. And what I found was damning. HR had been burying complaints for years. Harassment, discrimination, hostile work environment, all of it. As long as the accused person was a high performer, someone who brought in revenue or managed key accounts, their complaints got filed away and the accusers got pushed out. It was a pattern, a system, and it was protected from the top down. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found emails. Someone I'd connected with had saved everything before they left, and they shared it with me. Internal communications between HR and senior leadership, discussing how to handle complaints without impacting company metrics. Strategies for discrediting accusers. Discussions about timing resignations to avoid clustering that might trigger outside attention. They knew, HR knew, leadership knew. and they'd made a calculated decision that protecting their high performers was worth sacrificing everyone else. I contacted a lawyer, a good one who specialized in employment law and retaliation cases. I walked her through everything: the original harassment, the sham investigation, the retaliation, the pattern of behavior, the emails showing institutional knowledge and complicity. She said I had a case, a strong one, but she also said going after a company this size would be brutal. They'd fight. They'd try to bury me in legal fees and drag it out until I gave up. I told her I wasn't giving up. We filed a formal complaint with the EEOC. Then we did something else. We contacted the local news. I met with a reporter who'd covered corporate misconduct before, gave her everything: the documentation, the pattern, the emails. She spent 2 weeks verifying, reaching out to other former employees, building the story. And then it broke. The headline was something like "Major Tech Firm Accused of Systemic Cover-Up of Harassment Complaints." The article detailed everything: my case, the other cases, the emails showing HR and leadership knew and did nothing, the retaliation patterns. It went viral immediately, picked up by national outlets, trending on social media. Current employees started coming forward with their own stories. The floodgates opened. The company went into crisis mode, issued a statement about taking the allegations seriously and launching an independent investigation. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the federal investigation had already started. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within 3 months, Director Mitchell was fired. So was Richard, the compliance officer who'd buried my complaint. The head of HR was let go. 2 other senior leaders who'd been implicated in the emails were forced to resign. The company offered me a settlement, a significant one, with an NDA attached. My lawyer advised me to take it. I did. Not because I wanted to stay quiet, but because I'd already said everything that mattered. The story was out there. The pattern was exposed. Other people were coming forward. My part was done. The company overhauled their entire HR system, brought in outside consultants, implemented new complaint procedures with independent investigators, mandatory training, public accountability measures. Whether any of it will actually work long term, I don't know, but at least they can't say they didn't know anymore. I left the company shortly after the settlement, started over somewhere else. It took time to trust a workplace again, to believe that speaking up wouldn't automatically destroy my career. But I got there. Director Mitchell never apologized, never acknowledged what he did. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different company in a different industry, probably doing the same thing to someone else. Some people never change. But the system that protected him, that changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that the next person who files a complaint might actually get a fair investigation. Enough that HR can't just bury things anymore without someone asking questions. Sometimes you have to burn it down to rebuild it right. I didn't want to be the person who had to light the match, but when the alternative is letting it continue, letting more people get hurt, staying quiet stops being an option. I paid a price for speaking up: career disruption, legal stress, the emotional toll of reliving everything during the investigation. But I'd pay it again, because the alternative was living with the knowledge that I could have stopped it and didn't. Technology can expose corruption, but it can also be used to fake your entire reality. Just ask what happened to me during my performance review. I'd been working at the company for 3 years. I wasn't just doing my job, I was excelling at it. I'd taken on extra projects, mentored new hires, consistently hit my targets. My manager, Carol, seemed to notice. She'd pulled me aside multiple times over the past few months to tell me how impressed she was with my work, how I was really stepping up, how she was going to make sure that was reflected in my annual review. The review cycle came around and I was genuinely excited. Carol had been so positive, so encouraging. I'd been underpaid compared to industry standards for my role, and I knew a strong review would finally get me the raise I deserved. Maybe even a promotion. We had a one-on-one about a month before reviews were due. She went through everything I'd accomplished, praised my initiative, my attention to detail, my leadership with the new team members. She specifically said, and I remember this clearly, that she was writing me up for exceeds expectations across the board, that she was pushing for a significant raise because I'd earned it. I left that meeting feeling validated, feeling like all the late nights and extra effort had actually been noticed. I even started looking at apartments I could finally afford with a better salary. Then the official review came through. I opened the document expecting to see glowing feedback. Instead, it was mediocre. Meets expectations in most categories. A few exceeds here and there, but nothing outstanding. And the salary increase recommendation? 3%. Barely cost of living. I read it 3 times, thinking I'd somehow opened the wrong file. But no, it had my name on it. This was my review, and it bore no resemblance to the conversation I'd had with Carol just weeks earlier. I scheduled a meeting with her immediately, walked in with a printout of the review, trying to stay calm even though I was furious. I asked her point blank what had happened. She'd told me I was getting exceeds expectations across the board. She'd said she was pushing for a significant raise. Why was none of that in the actual review? Carol got this uncomfortable look on her face and started backtracking immediately. She said I must have misunderstood, that she'd given me positive feedback, sure, but she'd never promised exceeds expectations in every category. That I was doing good work, but good wasn't the same as exceptional. That a 3% raise was standard and I should be grateful for it. I just stared at her. I hadn't misunderstood anything. She'd been crystal clear, and now she was gaslighting me, acting like the conversation had been vague praise instead of specific commitments. That's when I pulled out my phone. I'd recorded our initial conversation, not because I was expecting this, but because I'd gotten into the habit of recording important work meetings after a previous manager had tried to deny things they'd said. My state was one-party consent, so it was completely legal. I opened the recording app, found the file, and hit play. Carol's voice came through the speaker, clear as day, praising my work, specifically saying she was marking me as exceeds expectations in every category, explicitly stating she was going to push for a substantial raise because I deserved it and was being underpaid for my contributions. The color drained from her face. She started stammering, saying she didn't know I'd been recording. I told her it was legal and she knew it. Then I asked her again, why did the review she submitted not match what she promised me? She didn't have an answer. Just kept saying there must have been a miscommunication, that things had changed, that budget constraints had come up. Every excuse sounded weaker than the last. I told her I was taking this to her supervisor. She tried to talk me out of it, said we could work something out, that I was overreacting. I wasn't interested in working anything out with someone who'd lied to my face and then tried to convince me I'd imagined the whole thing. I went straight to her boss, Mark, that afternoon, requested an urgent meeting, said there was a serious discrepancy with my performance review. He squeezed me in at the end of the day. I laid out everything, showed him the review Carol had submitted. Then I played him the recording of our conversation, let him hear in her own words the promises she'd made and how drastically different the actual review was. Mark's expression went from confused to angry as he listened. When the recording ended, he asked me to send him the file, said he needed to investigate this and he'd get back to me within 48 hours. It took less than 24. Mark called me into his office the next afternoon. Carol was already there, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. He told me that after reviewing the evidence, it was clear there had been a serious mishandling of my performance evaluation. My review was being corrected to reflect what Carol had actually observed and committed to. I was getting the exceeds expectations ratings across the board, and my raise was being adjusted to 8%, retroactive to when it should have gone into effect. He also said Carol had been formally reprimanded for misrepresenting employee performance and attempting to mislead both me and the company about my contributions. He apologized on behalf of the organization and said if I had any other concerns, his door was open. Carol didn't say a word the entire meeting, just sat there, staring at the table, while her boss dressed her down in front of me. After that, she avoided me completely. We'd pass in the hallway and she'd suddenly need to check her phone or duck into a conference room. Team meetings were awkward. She'd address everyone except me, relay information through other people, instead of talking to me directly. 3 months later, she transferred to a different department. I heard through the grapevine that Mark had made it clear her future at the company was limited if she stayed in her current role, that the review incident had damaged her credibility with leadership. I should probably feel bad about it, about the fact that my recording tanked her reputation and pushed her out of the department. But I don't. She lied. She tried to cheat me out of recognition and compensation I'd earned. And then she tried to gaslight me into thinking I'd made the whole thing up. If I hadn't had that recording, it would have been my word against hers. And in corporate environments, managers usually win those battles. I would have been stuck with a mediocre review, an insulting raise, and no recourse. The recording was the only thing that gave me leverage. The whole experience taught me something important. Trust your gut. When someone makes you a promise and then the outcome doesn't match, that's not a miscommunication. That's a choice they made to go back on their word. And if you can, document everything: emails, recordings, written notes, because people will absolutely try to rewrite history when it benefits them. I still work at the same company. My career has progressed nicely since then. I've gotten 2 more promotions, both with managers who actually follow through on what they say. And I still record important meetings, not because I expect everyone to lie, but because I know some people will, and I'm not going to be caught unprepared again. Carol eventually left the company entirely. I don't know where she ended up, and I don't particularly care. She made her choices. I just made sure there was accountability for them. Always trust your gut and your recording app. But betrayal doesn't always come from above. Sometimes it's the people right beside you, plotting behind your back. I'd been working on this startup for 2 years, poured everything into it. My savings, my time, relationships I'd neglected, sleep I'd sacrificed. It was a software platform that would revolutionize how small businesses managed inventory and logistics. The prototype was nearly perfect. My team of 4 had been with me from almost the beginning. We'd built this together, late nights in my apartment, pizza boxes stacked in corners, whiteboards covered in diagrams and code snippets. We were 3 days from launch, 3 days from everything we'd worked toward. The marketing was ready, the beta testers were lined up, investors were watching. I should have been excited. Instead, I had this gnawing feeling in my gut that something was wrong. My co-founder Jake had been acting weird for weeks, quiet during meetings, distracted, taking calls in the other room. The other team members seemed tense around me, like they knew something I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the pre-launch stress was getting to everyone, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I found the Slack messages. They'd been using our company Slack workspace to communicate, probably thinking I wouldn't check the channels they'd created. But I'm the admin. I can see everything. And what I saw made my blood turn to ice. They'd been negotiating with our biggest competitor for over a month, selling them our prototype, the entire code base, the documentation, the client list we'd been building, everything. And they were cutting me out completely. The plan was to let me launch, let me take on all the risk and liability, then resign as a group and take the technology with them to the competitor for a hefty payout. I sat there reading message after message, watching my team plot against me in real time. Jake leading the charge, convincing the others it was the smart move, that I was too idealistic, too focused on the mission instead of the money, that they deserved more than their equity shares would give them, that this was their chance to cash out big. The betrayal was suffocating. These weren't just employees. These were people I'd trusted, people I'd brought into my vision, given equity to, treated like partners, and they were planning to gut everything I'd built the second we went live. I didn't confront them immediately. I needed to think, needed to figure out how to protect what I'd created. That's when I remembered the kill switch. About 6 months earlier, I'd had a moment of paranoia. Just a fleeting thought that maybe I should build in some kind of failsafe, something only I could control in case things went sideways. I'd coded it into the core of the prototype, a remote shutdown that would brick the entire system if activated. I'd never told anyone about it. Honestly, I'd almost forgotten it existed, but now it was my insurance policy. I spent the next day gathering evidence, downloaded every Slack message, every email, every document that showed what they were planning, built a timeline of the negotiations with our competitor, documented every breach of contract, every violation of the non-disclosure agreements they'd all signed. Then I called a team meeting. They all showed up acting normal, smiling, making small talk, pretending like everything was fine. I let them settle in, laptops open, coffee in hand. Then I asked them point blank if there was anything they needed to tell me about their plans post-launch. The room went silent. Jake stammered something about being committed to the company. The others nodded along, avoiding eye contact. They were lying to my face, and we all knew it. I pulled up the Slack messages on the projector, watched their faces drain of color as their own words appeared on the screen. The negotiations, the timeline, the amount they'd been offered to sell out, all of it. Jake tried to spin it, said they were just exploring options, that nothing was finalized, that they were going to tell me eventually. The others jumped in with their own excuses, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. They'd been planning this for over a month. They'd had countless opportunities, to be honest, and had chosen deception every single time. I told them they were done, effective immediately. They could pack their things and leave, and if they thought they were taking anything with them, they were deluded. That's when Jake got aggressive, started talking about how they'd built this too, how they had rights to the code, how I couldn't just shut them out. He actually threatened legal action. That's when everything unraveled. I activated the kill switch right there in the meeting, pulled up the admin panel on my laptop and entered the command. The prototype went dark. Every instance, every backup they had access to, completely bricked, useless. They watched it happen in real time, scrambling to their own laptops, trying to stop it, realizing they had no control. I'd also locked them out of all company accounts, documentation repositories, client databases, everything. I'd spent the previous night making sure that anything critical was backed up to locations only I could access. They were left with nothing. Jake started yelling, threatened to sue, to go to the competitor anyway with what they knew. I calmly told him I'd already contacted our lawyer and that breach of contract claims were being filed against all of them, that their NDAs were ironclad, and if they tried to share any proprietary information, I'd pursue them for everything they had. The competitor deal fell apart within hours. They'd been buying the prototype and the team's expertise. Without the working prototype and with the team facing legal action, the deal was worthless. Our competitor pulled out, and my former team was left with nothing. No payout, no jobs, and a lawsuit hanging over their heads. I won't lie, the next few months were brutal. I had to rebuild parts of the prototype from scratch, rework systems that had relied on their contributions, delay the launch. I burned through my remaining savings hiring freelancers to help with specific components. There were days I thought about giving up, about just walking away from the whole mess, but I didn't. I rebuilt it solo, piece by piece, made it better than it had been, more secure, more efficient, completely under my control. And 6 months after I'd fired my entire team, I launched. The launch was successful, not explosively viral or anything, but steady, sustainable growth. Clients signed up, revenue started coming in, investors who'd been watching reached out. I hired new people, carefully this time, with better contracts and more thorough vetting. People I could actually trust. My former team tried reaching out a few times. Jake sent an email months later saying he'd made a mistake, that he wanted to talk about possibly working together again. I deleted it without responding. One of the others left a voicemail saying they were sorry, that they'd been desperate and made a bad choice. I didn't return the call. They made their decision. They chose betrayal over loyalty, greed over partnership, and they got exactly what they deserved. Nothing. Looking back, that kill switch was the smartest thing I ever coded. Not because I wanted to use it, but because when I needed it, it was there. It saved everything I'd worked for. These days, the company's doing well. We're growing, bringing on new clients, expanding features, and I sleep better knowing that everyone on the team actually wants to be here, actually believes in what we're building. Trust is everything in a startup. You're building something from nothing, and you need people who are as committed as you are. Jake and the others weren't. They were just looking for a payday, and when they didn't get it, they learned a valuable lesson about loyalty and consequences. I learned something too. Always have a failsafe. Always protect what you build, and never assume that people's intentions match their words. Actions tell the truth, and their actions told me everything I needed to know. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the betrayal itself, but choosing to walk away with your integrity intact. If these stories taught us anything, it's that you're stronger than the chaos people throw at you. Thanks for sticking with me through all 15 of these wild journeys. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which story hit hardest, and I'll see you in the next one. Rest easy, friends. You've got this.